Tom pushed his cleaning cart down the empty hallway, the wheels squeaking softly on the polished metal floor. The night shift at Mercy's Hand Medical Station was always quiet, but the pediatric wing felt especially lonely at this hour. Most of the young patients were sleeping, and the day staff had gone home to their quarters or family ships docked nearby. He had been working here for 3 years now, cleaning the same hallways, emptying the same trash bins, and mopping the same floors. The alien doctors barely noticed him anymore. To them, he was just another human doing the simple jobs that nobody else wanted. That was fine by Tom. He preferred being invisible. It meant he could watch and listen without anyone paying attention to what he was doing. The medical station floated in neutral space, right between human territory and the lands controlled by the Draconic Federation. Ships from dozens of different worlds came here when their sick children needed help that their own doctors could not provide. Tom had seen many strange creatures during his time here, but he had never gotten used to how different they all were from each other. Some were tall and thin like walking trees. Others were covered in fur or scales or had too many arms. A few glowed in the dark or changed colors when they were upset. The doctors who treated them were just as varied. Tom had learned to tell the difference between happy clicking sounds and angry ones, between the chemical smells that meant fear and the ones that meant excitement. Tonight, he was heading to the isolation ward on the far end of the wing. This was where they kept the patients who were too sick or too dangerous to be around the others. Most of the rooms were empty right now, which was good news for the galaxy, but made Tom's job even lonelier than usual. He stopped at room 247 and looked through the small window in the door. Inside, a small creature sat on the bed, staring out the viewport at the stars. Tom had seen this patient many times over the past 6 months, but he still did not know much about what was wrong with it. The creature looked like the dragons from Old Earth Stories, but much smaller. It was about the size of a house cat, with smooth red scales that shifted to orange and gold in the light. 2 small wings folded against its back, and its long tail was curled around its body like a blanket. The most striking thing about it were its eyes, which looked like pieces of cut crystal that caught and reflected every bit of light in the room. Tom knew from the medical charts he sometimes glimpsed that this was a Pyroth youngling named Ember. The Pyroth were famous throughout the galaxy as fierce warriors and clever politicians. Their adults were tall and proud, with voices that could shake walls when they were angry and words that could convince enemies to become friends. But this little one never made any sound at all. Tom had heard the doctors talking about Ember when they thought no one was listening. The youngling had not spoken a single word since arriving at the station. The Pyroth medical team had tried everything they could think of. They used their traditional healing crystals that were supposed to fix problems with the mind and spirit. They ran advanced brain scans that could map every thought and memory. They even brought in human doctors, who specialized in helping children who had been through terrible experiences. Nothing worked. Ember just sat in the same spot every day, looking out at the stars and ignoring everyone who tried to help. Some of the doctors were starting to whisper that maybe the damage was permanent. In Pyroth culture, being unable to speak was seen as a terrible shame. Adult Pyroth were expected to be bold and loud and confident. A silent Pyroth was considered broken. Tom entered the room quietly, not wanting to disturb Ember, even though the youngling never seemed to react to anything anyway. He began his usual routine, emptying the small trash bin and wiping down the surfaces with disinfectant. The room was already clean, but that was not the point. Every room had to be cleaned every night, whether it needed it or not. Rules were rules. As he worked, Tom found himself looking at Ember more than he probably should have. There was something about the way the small creature sat so perfectly still that reminded him of something from his own past. Tom had grown up in the colony orphanages back on Earth, where children who had no families lived until they were old enough to take care of themselves. He remembered what it felt like to be surrounded by people, but still feel completely alone. Some of the children in the orphanages dealt with their sadness by being loud and angry, getting into fights, or breaking things. Others, like Tom, learned that the best way to avoid more pain was to become invisible. If no one noticed you, no one could hurt you. But being invisible also meant that no one could help you, even when you desperately wanted them to. Tom finished cleaning the room and was about to leave when he noticed something different. Ember's crystal eyes were not looking out at the stars anymore. Instead, they were looking directly at him. Tom froze, not sure what to do. In all the months he had been cleaning this room, Ember had never acknowledged his presence before. The youngling did not make any sound or movement, but Tom could feel that something had changed. It was like the difference between a house that was empty and a house where someone was home but staying very quiet. Ember was still not speaking, but for the first time, the little dragon was truly seeing him. Tom gave a small nod, the kind of greeting you might give to a neighbor you did not know very well but wanted to be polite to. Then he quietly left the room and continued with his rounds. But as he pushed his cart down the hallway, he could not stop thinking about those crystal eyes and the way they had looked right into his own. Maybe tomorrow night he would try saying hello. The rest of his shift passed without incident. Tom cleaned the remaining rooms, restocked the supply closets, and filed his daily report with the night supervisor. But his mind kept drifting back to room 247 and the small creature who had finally noticed he existed. In a place where he was surrounded by brilliant doctors and advanced medical technology, it was strange to think that a simple moment of eye contact could feel like the most important thing that had happened all day. As Tom made his way back to his small quarters in the station's residential section, he wondered what tomorrow would bring. 3 weeks had passed since Ember first looked at Tom, and everything had changed. What started as a simple hello had grown into something neither of them had expected. Tom now spent at least an hour each night in room 247, and it had become the part of his shift that he looked forward to most. At first, their interactions were very simple. Tom would enter the room and say good evening, just like he would to any neighbor back on Earth. Ember would turn those crystal eyes toward him, but would not respond. Tom did not mind. He had learned long ago that some conversations did not need words from both sides to be meaningful. While he cleaned, Tom began talking about his day. Not the big important things that happened on the medical station, but the small details that most people never noticed. He talked about how the ventilation system in Section C made a funny whistling sound that reminded him of his grandfather's old tea kettle. He described the way the stars looked different from the observation deck in the morning compared to how they looked at night. He mentioned that the food dispensers in the cafeteria had been serving something that was supposed to be pizza but tasted more like cardboard with cheese-flavored paste on top. Ember never responded, but Tom began to notice small changes. The youngling's breathing would become slower and steadier when Tom talked about peaceful things like rain or flowers. When Tom described funny situations, like the time he accidentally walked into a supply closet that turned out to be occupied by a very surprised octopus-like doctor, Ember's tail would twitch slightly, as if the small dragon was trying not to laugh. Tom started bringing small gifts, not expensive things or medical supplies, but simple objects that had caught his attention during his daily routine. A smooth stone he had found in a corner where it must have fallen from someone's pocket. A flower that had been pressed between the pages of a requisition form he was supposed to file. A paper crane folded from a piece of recycling that had been destined for the waste processor. He would leave these gifts on the small table next to Ember's bed, never making a big deal about them but always making sure they were positioned where the youngling could easily see them. Each morning when Tom returned for the next shift, the gifts had been moved slightly, as if small claws had carefully examined each one. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday night, 3 months after their first Eye contact. Tom was cleaning the medical equipment in Ember's room when he accidentally caught his hand on a sharp piece of broken metal that should have been replaced weeks ago. The cut was not deep, but it bled more than he expected, and he made a small sound of pain and surprise. Tom immediately went to the room's first aid kit to clean and bandage the wound. He was focused on stopping the bleeding and did not realize that Ember had moved from the usual spot on the bed. The youngling had come, close enough to see what Tom was doing. When Tom looked up, Ember was sitting just a few feet away, crystal eyes fixed on the injured hand. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Ember opened that small mouth for the first time in months and spoke. The word came out as barely more than a whisper, but the universal translator caught it and repeated it in standard human language. Hurt? Tom almost dropped the bandage he was holding. After months of one-sided conversation, hearing Ember's voice was like discovering that a statue had suddenly come to life. The voice was higher than Tom had expected, with a musical quality that reminded him of wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Yes, Tom replied, trying to keep his own voice calm and steady. But it is not bad. Just a small cut. It will heal soon. Ember moved even closer, extending one small clawed hand toward the bandage. Help? The youngling asked. Tom nodded and showed Ember how to hold one end of the bandage while he wrapped it around his palm. The small dragon was very careful, making sure not to let the bandage slip or become too tight. When they were finished, Ember looked up at Tom with what might have been the first smile the youngling had worn in months. Better, Ember said, and Tom could hear satisfaction in that musical voice. From that night forward, Ember began to speak regularly, but only when they were alone together. The conversations were simple at first, mostly questions about colors and textures and the names of things. Ember wanted to know why human skin felt warm instead of cool like pyrith scales. Tom explained that humans were mammals, and their bodies worked differently from reptiles. This led to more questions about what mammals were and what Earth was like, and why Tom had decided to work in space instead of staying on his home planet. Tom found himself sharing stories he had not told anyone in years. He talked about growing up in the orphanages, about feeling like he did not belong anywhere, about how he had eventually found purpose in taking care of things that other people overlooked. Ember listened to every word with intense concentration, occasionally asking questions that showed the youngling was thinking deeply about everything Tom shared. One night, Ember asked why Tom chose to clean when he could do important work, like the doctors. Tom thought about this for a long time before answering. I think taking care of things is important, he said finally. The doctors help people get better, which is very important. But someone also needs to make sure the places where people get better are clean and safe and comfortable. If I do my job well, the doctors can do their jobs better, and the patients can focus on healing instead of worrying about dirt or broken things. Ember nodded seriously. Taking care is important, the youngling agreed. My family, my clutch siblings always took care of each other. We shared food and kept watch and made sure everyone was safe. It was the first time Ember had mentioned family or the past, and Tom could hear sadness in the musical voice. He did not push for more details, sensing that Ember was not ready to talk about whatever had happened before coming to the medical station. Instead, Tom began teaching Ember simple human activities that were focused on taking care of things. He showed the youngling how to fold paper into different shapes, explaining that origami was a way of creating beauty from ordinary materials. He demonstrated how to organize small objects so they were easy to find and use. He even let Ember help with some of the simpler cleaning tasks, like dusting surfaces that were already clean but needed to stay that way. Ember was eager to learn everything Tom could teach. The youngling had quick claws and an excellent memory, mastering new skills almost as soon as Tom demonstrated them. More importantly, Ember seemed to find the same sense of purpose and peace in these simple activities that Tom had discovered in his own work. But the most amazing thing was how Ember began to laugh. It started as small musical trills when Tom told silly jokes or made funny faces while trying to explain something complicated. Soon, Ember was making jokes too, usually observations about the various alien species that came to the medical station for treatment. The room that had been silent for so long was now filled with conversation and laughter every night. Tom had never realized how lonely his work had been until he had someone to share it with. 5 months into their friendship, Ember finally told Tom what had happened before coming to the medical station. It was during one of their quiet evenings together, while Tom was showing the youngling how to make a paper flower from an old supply, Manifest. Ember's small claws were getting very good at the delicate folding, but tonight the movements were slower and more hesitant than usual. "Tom," Ember said softly, not looking up from the paper, "can I tell you about my family?" Tom stopped what he was doing and gave Ember his full attention. In all their conversations, the youngling had only mentioned family once, and the sadness in that musical voice had made it clear the subject was painful. Tom had never pushed, knowing that some stories could only be told when the person was ready. "Of course," Tom said. "I would be honored to hear about them." Ember carefully set down the half-finished paper flower and curled up in the familiar position, tail wrapped around like a blanket. But instead of staring out at the stars like before, Ember looked directly at Tom. "I had 4 clutch siblings," Ember began. "We hatched at the same time and grew up together. Their names were Spark, Flamewing, Crystal Song, and Startail. I was the smallest, so they always protected me and made sure I got enough food and stayed warm at night." Tom nodded, remembering his own experiences with the other children in the orphanages. Even when resources were scarce, the older children often looked out for the younger ones. "We were traveling with our parents to a diplomatic meeting," Ember continued. "Pirate families often travel together to important events. It shows unity and strength. But our ship was attacked by pirates who wanted to steal the valuable crystals. We were carrying as gifts for the other diplomats." Ember's voice became very quiet, and Tom had to lean forward to hear the words. "The pirates boarded our ship during the night shift, when most of the adults were sleeping. My clutch siblings and I were in our family quarters, playing a game where we had to stay completely silent and still like we were hunting prey. It was just pretend, but when the pirates came, Spark whispered that we should keep playing the game for real." Tom felt a cold sensation in his stomach, understanding where this story was leading. The pirates were looking for adults and older. "Younglings who might fight back or call for help," Ember said. "They had sensors that could detect movement and heat, but our sleeping area was designed to be cool and dark for proper rest. As long as we stayed perfectly still and quiet, they could not find us." Ember paused for a long moment, crystal eyes reflecting the soft light in the room. But Crystal Song got scared and started to cry. It was just a tiny sound, but the pirates heard it. They found our hiding place and Ember's voice trailed off. Tom reached out slowly and placed one hand near Ember, not touching but close enough that the youngling could feel the warmth. "You do not have to tell me everything," he said gently. "Not if it is too hard." But Ember continued. "They killed my clutch siblings because they thought older younglings might be dangerous later. But I was so small and scared that I could not make any sound at all. I just froze completely like I was already dead. The pirates looked right at me, but decided I was not worth bothering with." Now Tom understood why Ember had been silent for so long. Speaking meant making noise, and making noise had meant death for the youngling's family. The trauma had created a connection in Ember's mind between using voice and terrible consequences. "I stayed frozen in that position until the rescue ships came 2 days later," Ember said. "Even then I could not speak or move. The doctors said I was in shock, but I knew the real reason. Speaking had gotten my family killed. If I had not been playing that stupid game, if I had been making normal sounds like always, maybe the pirates would have found us right away and just taken us prisoner instead of—" Ember's voice broke completely. Tom moved closer and very carefully. Put his arm around the small dragon, offering what comfort he could. Ember leaned into the warmth, something the youngling had never done with any of the medical staff. "It was not your fault," Tom said firmly. "The pirates made the choice to hurt your family. Nothing you did or did not do caused that to happen. You were just a child trying to survive." "But I did survive," Ember whispered. "I survived because I stayed quiet while they died because they could not." Tom held Ember a little closer, remembering his own guilt about surviving the orphanages when some other children had not been so lucky. Survivor's guilt was something humans understood well, but apparently it existed in other species too. "Surviving is not something to feel guilty about," Tom said. "Your clutch siblings would want you to live and be happy. That is what family does. They protect each other so the ones who survive can carry on and remember them." Over the following weeks, Ember began to share more memories of life before the attack. The youngling told Tom about pirate traditions, about the games clutch siblings played together, about the beautiful crystal caves where their family had lived. Some of the memories were sad, but others were full of joy and laughter. Tom shared his own stories in return. He told Ember about Earth traditions like birthday parties and holidays, about the friends he had made in the orphanages, about the first time he had seen a real ocean. He talked about how he had learned to find family among people who were not related to him by blood, and how taking care of others had helped him heal from his own painful past. Together, they developed their own traditions. Every night, Tom would bring a new origami pattern to teach Ember, and the youngling would share a pirate song or story in return. Ember's voice grew stronger and more confident during these exchanges, though the youngling still fell silent whenever anyone else entered the room. They also began working together on small projects around the medical station. Ember helped Tom organize supply closets and clean hard-to-reach spaces, using those small claws and wings to get into places Tom could not access. The youngling seemed to find the same sense of purpose and satisfaction in this work that Tom did, but most importantly, they developed a deep trust that allowed both of them to be vulnerable without fear of judgment. Tom told Ember about his worst nightmares and his biggest regrets. Ember shared fears about the future and guilt about the past. Together, they created a safe space where being broken was acceptable and healing could happen at its own pace. Dr. Reth, the lead pirate physician, began to notice Ember's improvement, but could not understand what was causing it. He ran more tests and tried new treatments, but every time he entered Ember's room, the youngling would fall completely silent again. From his perspective, nothing had changed. Other medical staff reported seeing Ember move around the room more and even caught glimpses of the youngling arranging small objects in precise patterns. But whenever they tried to interact directly, Ember would retreat into the old silent state. Dr. Reth became increasingly frustrated. This case was supposed to be a demonstration of pirate medical superiority. Their advanced techniques should have been able to heal trauma that primitive human methods could not touch. Instead, a simple janitor seemed to be achieving results that made their entire medical team look incompetent. But Tom and Ember were unaware of the growing tension among the medical staff. They were too busy discovering that healing could happen in the quiet spaces between one person's story and another's understanding, in the simple act of being truly seen and accepted exactly as they were. High Commander Flame of the Eastern Sky had been watching the security feeds from her child's room for 2 months now, and what she saw challenged everything she thought she knew about strength, healing, and honor. She sat in her private quarters, aboard her flagship, which was docked at the medical station's military port, staring at displays that showed her the most impossible things she had ever witnessed. Her child was laughing. Ember, who had not spoken a word since the pirate attack 8 months ago, was sitting on the floor of room 247, folding something out of paper, while talking animatedly to a human janitor. The youngling's tail was swishing back and forth with excitement, and those crystal eyes were bright with curiosity and joy. It was like watching her real child return from the dead. Flame had arrived at the medical station 3 weeks ago, expecting to find either a miraculous recovery or to make the difficult decision that Pyroth military culture demanded when a warrior could not be healed. In their society, being unable to speak was worse than death. A silent Pyroth could never serve in the military, could never participate in the complex verbal dueling that settled disputes, could never carry on the proud traditions of their ancestors. The Pwai. Doctors had told her there had been some improvement, but they could not explain what was causing it or how to replicate it. Dr. Reth had been especially frustrated, insisting that their traditional healing methods should be more effective than whatever primitive approach the humans were using. But when Flame reviewed the medical records, she could not see any evidence of human medical intervention at all. That was when she requested access to the security feeds. What she found there defied all logic. Her child, who refused to speak to trained Pyroth therapists and experienced trauma specialists, was having long conversations with a human who cleaned floors for a living. Ember, who had been declared potentially beyond help by some of the galaxy's most skilled doctors, was learning origami and helping to organize cleaning supplies. At first, Flame had been angry. How dare this human interfere with proper medical treatment? What right did a mere janitor have to spend time with a Pyroth youngling without permission? But as she watched night after night, her anger transformed into something much more complicated. The human, whose name according to the files was Tom, never tried to examine Ember or run tests or push for faster progress. He simply treated the youngling like a person worth knowing, someone whose thoughts and feelings mattered. He listened to Ember's stories with genuine interest, shared his own experiences without trying to minimize Ember's trauma, and offered comfort without demanding anything in return. Flame watched Tom teach her child how to make paper flowers and birds, how to arrange objects in pleasing patterns, how to find satisfaction in simple tasks done well. She saw Ember's growing confidence, the way the youngling's posture became straighter and more relaxed at the same time. She observed moments of pure joy when Ember would successfully complete a difficult fold or make Tom laugh with a clever observation. Most remarkably, she witnessed Tom's response when Ember finally shared the story of the pirate attack. The human had not offered empty reassurances or tried to rush past the painful parts. Instead, he had listened with complete attention, acknowledged Ember's pain as real and valid, and then shared his own experiences with loss and survivor's guilt. It was exactly the kind of response that Pyroth therapists were trained to provide, but somehow Tom's version felt more genuine and effective. As a military commander, Flame had studied human tactics extensively. She knew they were unpredictable, in battle, willing to sacrifice themselves for strangers, and capable of forming alliances across species lines that other races found difficult to understand. But she had always assumed these traits were simply different expressions of the same basic drives that motivated all warriors, the desire to protect territory, resources, and genetic lineage. Watching Tom with Ember made her realize there was something more complex happening. The human was not protecting his own offspring or even his own species. He was not gaining territory, resources, or status from this relationship. Instead, he seemed to be motivated by something Pyroth culture, barely recognized as existing, the simple desire to ease suffering wherever he found it. Flame began to research Tom's background, using her military access to files that civilian doctors could not see. What she learned surprised her even more. Tom had grown up without parents in human institutional care facilities. He had been given opportunities for advanced education and prestigious careers, but had chosen instead to work in maintenance and cleaning jobs across various space stations. His supervisors consistently rated him as reliable and thorough, But he had never sought promotions or recognition. In Pyroth society, such choices would be seen as evidence of damaged pride or lack of proper ambition. But watching Tom interact with her child, Flame began to understand that his choices came from a different kind of strength. He had found purpose in caring for things that others overlooked, and he approached this purpose with the same dedication that Pyroth warriors brought to battle. Flame also noticed how Tom's presence affected the other staff members who worked in the pediatric wing. The human doctors seemed more relaxed during their shifts when Tom was around. The alien nurses often stopped to chat with him about small problems that were bothering them. Even the cleaning robots seemed to function more efficiently in areas where Tom had recently worked. It was as if his quiet competence and genuine care created a ripple effect that made everyone around him a little bit better at their own jobs. Flame recognized this phenomenon from her military experience. Certain officers had the same effect on their troops, creating environments where everyone performed at their peak simply because they felt valued and supported. But there was something. Tom was doing that went beyond even the best military leadership Flame had witnessed. He was seeing potential in beings that others had written off as broken or useless. Ember was not the only one benefiting from Tom's attention. Flame observed him spending extra time in the rooms of other young patients who were not responding well to treatment, offering the same patient listening and simple companionship that had helped her child. Some of these other cases had also begun showing improvement, though their doctors could not explain why. A young plant-like creature that had been wilting despite perfect environmental controls began growing again after Tom started bringing it pictures of earth gardens to look at. A small mammalian child that had been having terrible nightmares began sleeping peacefully after Tom taught it how to make paper stars to hang above its bed. Dr. Reth and the other Pyroth medical staff remained convinced that Tom was somehow interfering with proper treatment, but Flame could see that the opposite was true. The human was accomplishing what their advanced techniques could not because he understood something about healing that did not appear in any medical textbook. Recovery was not just about fixing damaged systems or resolving trauma through approved therapeutic methods. Sometimes healing required something as simple as being seen, truly seen, by someone who cared whether you existed or not. Tom offered that gift freely to anyone who needed it, without expecting anything in return except the satisfaction of knowing he had made someone's day a little bit brighter. Flame found herself watching the security feeds every night, learning more about effective leadership and genuine strength from a human janitor than she had from years of military training. She saw Tom handle Ember's difficult days with endless patience, celebrate small victories with genuine enthusiasm, and provide steady support without trying to control the pace of recovery. Most importantly, she watched her child transform from a silent, broken survivor into a confident, curious youngling who was eager to learn about the world and ready to form new connections with others. It was exactly the kind of miracle she had hoped for, just not accomplished in the way she had expected. Dr. Reth slammed his clawed hand down on the conference table hard enough to make the other medical staff jump. His crystalline eyes were bright with anger and frustration as he glared at the human administrator sitting across from him. "This has gone on long enough," he declared, his voice carrying the authoritative tone that made most beings step back in respect or fear. "The human janitor is clearly interfering with proper medical treatment. My patient shows signs of improvement only when left alone with this Tom person, which suggests an unhealthy dependency that will prevent true healing." Captain Hayes, the station's human administrator, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had been hoping to avoid this confrontation, but Dr. Reth had been growing more insistent over the past few weeks. The Pyroth physician had requested this meeting to discuss what he called unprofessional conduct by maintenance staff. "Dr. Reth," Hayes began carefully, "our maintenance personnel are trained to be courteous to all patients. If Tom has been friendly with your patient, I hardly see how that could be considered interference." "Friendly?" Dr. Reth's scales shifted to a darker shade of red, indicating increasing agitation. The youngling refuses to speak to qualified medical professionals, but will engage in extensive conversations with someone who has no training, no credentials, and no understanding of Pyroth psychology. This is not friendship. This is manipulation. Hayes glanced at the other doctors around the table, noting their uncomfortable expressions. Most of them had seen some improvement in their own difficult cases recently, and several had mentioned noticing Tom spending extra time with patients who were not responding well to treatment. None of them wanted to admit that a janitor might be more effective than they were at helping traumatized children. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Hayes said finally. "Remove this Tom person from any contact with Pyroth patients immediately," Dr. Reth demanded. "Assign him to other areas of the station where he cannot interfere with legitimate medical procedures. The youngling needs to learn to interact with appropriate authority figures, not form attachments to beings who cannot provide proper guidance." Hayes sighed. He did not want to punish Tom for being kind to patients, but he also could not afford to create a diplomatic incident with the Pyroth medical establishment. The medical station relied on cooperation from dozens of different species, and maintaining good relationships was essential for continued operations. "I will speak with Tom and make sure he understands the boundaries of his position," Hayes said reluctantly. "Perhaps he can be reassigned to other duties that do not involve patient contact." Dr. Reth nodded with satisfaction. "Good. I will inform the youngling's parent that proper medical protocols are being restored. High Commander Flame of the Eastern Sky is arriving tomorrow to assess her child's condition and determine next steps for treatment." That evening, Tom arrived for his usual shift to find Hayes waiting for him in the maintenance office. The administrator looked tired and unhappy, which immediately put Tom on alert. In his experience, conversations that started with supervisors looking upset rarely ended well. "Tom, we need to talk," Hayes said without preamble. "There have been some complaints about your interactions with patients in the pediatric ward." Tom felt his heart sink, though he tried to keep his expression neutral. "What kind of complaints?" "Dr. Reth believes that your relationship with the young Pyroth patient is interfering with proper medical treatment," Hayes explained. "He has requested that you be reassigned to duties that do not involve patient contact." "Ember is getting better," Tom said quietly. "The youngling is speaking now, participating in activities, showing interest in learning new things. How is that interference?" "I know," Hayes said, and his voice carried genuine regret. "Everyone has noticed the improvement, but Dr. Reth is concerned that the patient is becoming too dependent on you instead of learning to interact with medical professionals. He thinks this dependency could prevent long-term recovery." Tom understood the logic, even if he disagreed with it. In human medical practice, there was often concern about patients becoming too attached to individual caregivers instead of developing the skills they would need to function independently. But Tom also knew that Ember was not avoiding other people out of dependency. The youngling was avoiding them because they represented the kind of authority figures who had failed to protect Ember's family. "When does this reassignment take effect?" Tom asked. "Starting tomorrow night," Hayes said. "I am sorry, Tom. I know you care about the patients, but I cannot risk creating problems with our Pyroth partners." Tom nodded and began gathering his cleaning supplies. There was no point in arguing with Hayes, who was just trying to do his job and maintain station operations. But Tom knew he had to say goodbye to Ember before the reassignment went into effect. The youngling deserved an explanation, not just sudden abandonment. Room 247 was quiet when Tom entered for what might be the last time. Ember was sitting in the usual spot on the bed, working on a complex origami dragon that Tom had taught the youngling how to make the week before. The small claws moved with practiced precision, folding and creasing the paper into the proper shapes. "Tom," Ember looked, up with the bright expression that had become familiar over the past several months. "Look, I almost finished it. Just the wings left to do." That is beautiful work, Tom said, and he meant it. Ember had become quite skilled at origami, often completing patterns that challenged even Tom's abilities. You have become a master at paper folding. Ember beamed with pride, then noticed something different in Tom's expression. What is wrong? You look sad. Tom sat down in his usual spot next to the bed, trying to find the right words. Ember, I need to tell you something important. Starting tomorrow, I will not be able to visit you anymore. I am being moved to different work that does not include the pediatric ward. The paper dragon fell from Ember's claws as the youngling stared at Tom in shock. Why? Did I do something wrong? No, Tom said quickly. You did nothing wrong at all. Dr. Reth thinks that spending time with me might be preventing you from getting better in other ways. He wants you to focus on working with the medical staff instead. Ember's crystal eyes began to glow brighter, which Tom had learned was a sign of strong emotion. But I do not want to work with them. They do not understand. They ask too many questions and want me to talk about things that hurt. You never make me do that. I know, Tom said gently. But maybe Dr. Reth is right. Maybe you need to learn to trust other people too, not just me. The doctors want to help you, even if they do it differently than I do. No! Ember's voice was louder than Tom had ever heard it, loud enough that anyone passing in the hallway would be able to hear clearly. Tom stays! Tom is my family now! The door to the room opened, and Dr. Reth entered with two other Pyroth medical staff members. Tom assumed they had come to check on their patient and had heard Ember's outburst, but behind them came another figure that made Ember gasp and freeze completely. High Commander Flame of the Eastern Sky was everything Tom had expected a Pyroth, military leader to be. She was tall and imposing, with scales that shifted from deep red to gold as she moved. Her eyes were the same crystal type as Ember's, but larger and more intense. When she spoke, her voice carried the kind of authority that made even Dr. Reth step back respectfully. I heard my child speaking, she said, looking directly at Tom. For the first time in 8 months, I heard Ember's voice from the hallway. Dr. Reth moved forward, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. High Commander, we were just implementing new treatment protocols. The human was about to be removed from patient contact as we discussed. Were you? Flame asked, but she was still looking at Tom, not Dr. Reth. Human, what is your name? Tom, Your Honor, Tom replied, using the formal address he had learned for addressing high-ranking Pyroth officials. Tom, Flame repeated, testing the sound of it. My child has spoken your name many times in the past few months. Tom felt confused. As far as he knew, Ember had never talked to anyone except him since recovering the ability to speak. I do not understand, Your Honor. Flame moved closer, and Tom could see something in her crystal eyes that looked almost like amusement. Did you think I would send my child to a medical facility without monitoring their progress? I have been watching the security feeds from this room for weeks, Tom. I have seen every conversation, every lesson, every moment of healing that you have provided. Dr. Reth made a sound of surprise. High Commander, if you have been observing the patient's interactions, then you know that proper medical protocols require silence, Flame said, and her voice carried enough command authority to make everyone in the room freeze. I have observed both proper medical protocols and improper human kindness. I know which one healed my child. She turned back to Tom, and her expression softened slightly. In my culture, we value strength above all else. We believe that warriors must be loud and bold and ready to fight any challenge. But you have shown me a different kind of strength, Tom. You saw my child not as a broken warrior, but as a frightened youngling who needed safety to find their voice again. Tom did not know what to say to that, so he remained quiet and waited to see what would happen next. Among my people, Flame continued, wisdom and dedication like yours would make you worthy of the highest honors. You have done what our greatest healers could not accomplish, using nothing but patience and genuine care. She moved to stand beside Ember, placing one large clawed hand gently on the youngling's shoulder. Therefore, I formally adopt you, Tom, of Earth, into the House of Eastern Sky as my child's battle brother. This gives you equal status with our family and the right to continue caring for Ember as long as both of you desire it. The room fell completely silent. Dr. Reth looked shocked. The other medical staff appeared confused, and Tom felt like he might be dreaming. Adoption into a Pyroth house was an honor rarely given to outsiders, and certainly never given to someone in a maintenance position. But Ember's reaction was pure joy. The youngling launched forward and wrapped both arms around Tom in the first physical hug either of them had shared. Tom is family now, Ember said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Real family that chooses to stay. Flame nodded with satisfaction. Real family indeed. And family protects each other, helps each other heal, and finds strength in the bonds they choose to create. She looked directly at Dr. Reth. This human will continue his work with my child and with any other young patients who might benefit from his unique approach to healing. Dr. Reth opened his mouth as if to protest, then seemed to think better of it. Arguing with a high commander was not a career-building strategy, especially when that commander had just formally adopted the being you wanted to restrict. Over the following months, Tom's role at the medical station expanded far beyond his original maintenance duties. He became an official specialist in interspecies trauma recovery, working with young patients from dozens of different worlds who had not responded well to traditional medical approaches. Ember became his assistant, helping to translate not just languages but the emotional needs of children who felt lost and alone. Flame visited regularly, bringing other Pyroth commanders who wanted to understand how human approaches to healing might benefit their own warriors who had suffered trauma in battle. Some of them were skeptical at first, but watching Tom work with their children began to change their perspectives on what real strength looked like. The medical station developed new protocols that combined advanced alien medical technology with human insights about the importance of being truly seen and valued. Other facilities began requesting similar programs, and Tom found himself training both doctors and maintenance staff in techniques for creating environments where healing could happen naturally. But the most important change was the simplest one. Room 247 was no longer silent. It was filled with conversation and laughter and the sound of small claws carefully folding paper into beautiful shapes. Two beings who had both known loneliness and loss had found family in the most unexpected place, proving that sometimes the most profound healing happens not through advanced technology or formal medical procedures, but through the simple act of choosing to care for each other.